let's understand this happens in other situations as well. So we go from the calm, the flirtatious, the funny, the whatever else, and then it gets to violence, then it gets to anger, and then it goes back again to calm, and then it goes to pleading, then it goes to being the victim. Again, I've watched enough of these videos. It's a very consistent pattern, and it's disturbing with how quickly the person can change.
Hello and welcome to Awake at the Wheel. So in today's episode, we're going to be exploring entitlement. So these days, I think we hear this word a lot when we see poor behavior and, people behaving in a certain way. And I want to start out with a story that I witnessed from a couple weeks ago at the airport. So I think this is maybe a perfect example of entitlement, but I also think there's perhaps some other things going on there. So Oren, I think I shared this story a little bit with you, but I'll get into some more detail. So on our recent trip to Florida, before boarding, we had some time, so decided to grab a bite to eat. So there's a Japanese restaurant at the Detroit airport. It's airport food, so I wasn't expecting, a whole lot, but also the prices were quite high. Again, I think to be expected at the airport. So we sat down, we're waiting for our food, and the couple next to us, it looks like they had ordered a ton of food. And we hear some rumblings between the woman and the guy, and she just didn't seem impressed. So she called over the server and said, I'm not happy with this. And I kind of leaned my ear over a little bit more to hear what she was saying. And she just went on and on and on about, and I was actually worried. Let me pause for a second. I was worried because I had ordered some sushi. I'm like, oh, maybe airport sushi wasn't the best idea. Because I'm like, maybe there's something gross about the food that she ordered. Right. And I'm listening and she's like, the presentation of this is completely inappropriate. We come here all the time and for $14 a roll, I would expect this to be presented far better than it is. And she went on to say, and if anybody actually thinks that this is acceptable, there's something wrong with our society. Right. I'm like, she's talking about sushi at the airport. So the server was, professional and polite and said, I understand, but this is the same sushi chef we've had here for 20 years. And I don't see anything particularly wrong with this. And she then demanded to go and speak to the chef. So she got up out of her seat, went over to the sushi counter and gave the same story to the sushi chef. And I, of course, couldn't see the look on his face, but I can imagine kind of shocked and didn't really know what to say. Mm-hmm. This went on to the server then saying, well, would you like me to call my manager? Well, of course I want to call the manager. Of course I need to talk about this. This is completely inappropriate and unacceptable. So she called the manager. They waited for a little while. The manager came over from wherever in the airport she was. And the same story repeated about how inappropriate this sushi presentation was. Well, to make a very long story short, it ended in the manager saying, okay, we'll completely take it off the bill. And while I can see where the manager is coming from, she totally did not back up her staff there. I could hear rumblings between the chef and the server after this person left, just about how rude and, just unkind this woman was to them about a non-issue. So was this entitlement? Maybe. Was this her having high standards? Maybe, but probably not. But this really kind of brought to mind the podcast and something that we can really talk about, because I think that this is happening more and more and is becoming more and more, I wouldn't say acceptable, but permitted. So what are your thoughts on that story?
All right. So many layers for such a simple story. So First, my wife is Japanese. She makes literally the best sushi you can imagine. As
coming over.
All right. And so she knows presentation is important. That's part of the whole thing. Okay. So on the one hand, I understand, wanting to have food presented a certain way, understand the price. I was just at the airport and paying $15 for a terrible hamburger. Not happy. All right. So I get all that. So, as always, you and I, we don't take a black and white approach. We try to take nuance. We try to integrate everything. More than one thing can be true at once. So I can understand her being upset, etc. It was the attitude with which she was presenting her case and treating the other people, right? That is the story I'm hearing. And the funny thing is, when we do diagnoses for narcissistic personality disorder, one of the questions when we do the structured clinical interview for the DSM is we ask, when things go wrong or whatever, do you always demand to speak to the top person or the person in charge, something like that? And it's funny because I've asked this to literally thousands of people. And some people, they say it and they're a narcissist. Others, there's a reason behind it. I'm the same way. Well, if I'm going to talk to an underling, pardon the language, but how am I going to get recourse? Are they going to be able to do anything, et cetera? So the reason I'm saying this is, before we start throwing labels around or other people tossing diagnoses, we talked about this in other podcasts. So many people are talking about these things. Two things can be true at once, or just because something's true doesn't make it something else. So demanding to talk to the manager or the chef or whatever isn't in of itself narcissism, but it's the way that it's enacted, and is this part of a broader pattern that the person is always going to be demanding and always have unrealistically high expectations and so on. So just because I just don't want people watching this and going, aha, this is a sign. I told you I knew that you were a narcissist because you did that. Like, again, there's layers to it. So and then in general, this mistreatment, and I think we'll see it in the videos, this mistreatment of people, whether it's a server, whether it's a police officer, whether it's a teacher. The fact is, yes, you're right. It's becoming more accepted. It's being more tolerated. It's being more promoted. And as I'm sure you and I will talk, and I know it's going to piss off a small segment of the society, but there is a clear reason why this is happening. And then the final point, just with all these layers, the drinking word of the drinking game word of today will be entitlement, I'm sure. And the fact is, for over 15 years, I can't remember because I know I said this on a TV interview about 15 years ago. About 15 years ago or more, I said when I've spoken to leaders in various industries, okay, bosses, managers, VPs, CEOs, whoever, and I asked them, what's the number one word that you use to describe young people of today, your employees, your staff? The most common, I don't even know if it's 70 or 80, I think it's like 98%, if not 100% of the people all say entitled, all right? And that was over 15 years ago. And it's only got worse over time. And the fact is, people are born entitled, so to speak. Okay, like kids they're helpless. They want me. It's not their fault that they're this way. It's the fault of the parents or the structures in society that permit them or encourage them to be this way. And that's what we're going to be talking about. So that's my 2 cents.
And this is the thing, right? You're correct in saying that, yeah, kids are born this way because that's a survival instinct. They have to be, they're egocentric when they're little, and parents do cater to that because that's the way it is. But when that doesn't stop is when it, clearly becomes problematic. Mm-hmm. And to touch on what you said earlier about personality disorders, I think that all too often people throw around that term narcissist, but the reality is we're talking single digits of the population who actually meet the criteria for personality disorders. So we can't, blame all of this behavior on that, as some often do.
Right. And again, tossing words around without meaning is never helpful. So that's what I want to say. It can be a sign of narcissism. It certainly is a sign of narcissism, but just because someone acts that way doesn't mean they are a narcissist. Okay. Right. Or they have narcissistic personality disorder. They may be a narcissist, quote unquote. Okay. And the reason I'm saying this is, as we're talking, we might be, when we ask, as always, about what can you do about this? Well, it's not just about recognizing it in yourself if you have certain tendencies, but if you see these red flags in somebody else, let's see it for what it is. Let's not rationalize it. Let's not make excuses for that behavior, which is what's happening, which is why it's getting even worse and worse.
Yeah. And it's interesting that, sometimes when I talk about people being entitled, I feel like an old lady saying, oh, kids these days and this and that. But there's, with the growing content being placed on the internet, we're seeing evidence of this left and right. And we're going to look at some perhaps more extreme examples, but these are happening more and more. So without further ado, let's watch the first video and we can talk a little bit more about what we think is going on.
On March 7th, 2023, an officer was called by school staff in reference to a drunk minor who had been misbehaving and was very uncooperative. She had also hidden a bottle of alcohol in her pocket and wasn't taking it out. Here's what happened when the police arrived.
Okay, now is it right here and she won't give it to me. Probably it's right there. She just dropped it right there now.
Well, I was trying to. I can sure tell you were trying to.
No, I wasn't. I just had my hand.
No, I wasn't. No cares.
I don't.
Okay, well, hush it up.
Yeah, knock it off. Okay.
You too. Oh, hell no.
So it's not good.
Move. Take my head, punk.
I didn't punk it.
Yes, you did. Oh, stop fighting.
So
You
it's not good.
stop. You need to stop fighting. Let go. Let go. Just let go. Just let go. I don't want you touching me, okay? You're in my real thing.
Okay.
You're trying to real ugly. Shut up. I don't care about you, okay? Shut up. Just don't make me warmer. Mad. Oh, that shit hurt.
I'll help you, Dahlia, but I can't if you're doing this.
Shut up. Oh, my God. You guys see how red my arm is?
Mother arrived and engaged in a heated argument with the staff and the officer.
I've been here already like hysterical. Looking for my daughter and nobody's nothing.
Come, she's detained.
Detained wiser.
She's in and attacked the principal when I went to
She went
detain
to
her.
attack the principal, but why are you guys hour back there for? That's
She's been drinking alcohol.
Where did she get that from?
I don't know. Ask her. But she's detained
So why are you
right
guys hour back there? Nobody's
Calm
telling me
down.
nothing. I'm gonna sue all you guys.
now. You can sue, but she's detained. Okay, you can pick her up in
Detained
Little.
where?
She's detained. I detained her.
Where? Where's my daughter? Why did you
She's
detain her? Did you put your
gonna-
dirty ass
Stop.
on my daughter? Because I understand that you grabbed her like that.
She's gonna be charged.
Charged for what?
She's gonna be charged with
Why
battery.
you guys threw her to the room and she was right here in the area calling me?
She's gonna be charged battery on the school personnel and minor possession of alcohol.
So the
All
first
right.
word that comes to mind for me is lack of accountability on both of their behalf. So I want to say this, gently and kindly, understanding that there are indeed problems, but I will say that I think a lot of that attitude stems from this hate that people have for police officers now, right? There's this automatic, oh, I'm going to sue you. You obviously were doing something wrong is what the mother jumped into. And even with the daughter, she's behaving badly. The officer is enforcing, his rights to do his job essentially. And she goes, oh, you hurt me. And it turns into this whole thing where, she's not holding herself accountable in any way whatsoever. So for me, that's the overarching theme there is no accountability whatsoever.
All right. So for me, there's several themes. That's the big one for sure. And what people have to understand is this was edited. There was much more before the police officer actually took her down. I've seen the whole video.
Yeah.
Same with mom. She keeps coming back and fighting. So just everyone knows there's far more context to it. The girl had been calling her mom, and that's how her mom knew about this, and is speaking to her, being really rude to the staff, to the police officer, to everybody. And as you say, no accountability, thinking I can say and do whatever I want. If you saw this, I mean, again, we're going to sound like old people, get off my lawn. But the fact is, it's just decency. This person had no decency, no civility, no respect for anybody. It was reprehensible behavior. And so there's a few things about this. And I'm sure this is going to cut across several podcasts, but I know this is one of my dirty little pleasures. Okay. I am watching these videos. I started watching them because I want to know what actually happens. We hear all these reports about police officers treat people badly, blah, blah. So I started watching. And as many as I could from a variety of different sources. If you go to only one source, it's always going to be a narrative. But these are raw police video cam footage. So it's not like they're editing and there's not a documentary and everything. We're seeing as much as we can see. And so a few things, and people aren't going to like it. But the reality is, if you watch enough of these, you're going to see that in most cases, not all, in most cases, if you're respectful, if you comply and everything like that, nothing bad is going to happen. The worst will be proportionate to what you've done. If you've sped, if you've got alcohol hidden on you, whatever, it will be dealt with in a very minor way. And by the way, in the end of these things, you see these people, they kick officers, do all these things, they flee, they have like a litany of like 10 different crimes in that one incident. And then it's always pled down to almost nothing. Okay, so their lives aren't being ruined, even though they should be ruining their own lives with their conduct. Anyway, the point is, so when you watch all of this, it really contradicts the lie that all police officers are racist, all cops are bastards, et cetera, et cetera. And really, because when they talk about how people of certain groups get mistreated or are assaulted, et cetera. Again, if you watch this, people from the same group, when they don't act suspicious, when they don't fight back, when they could just comply. And I'm not saying because people are going to say, oh, you bootlicker. I'm not saying to give in, mindlessly to authority. I'm saying be civil and respectful if the other person is being that way with you. And if an officer is being a little bit rude to you, well, go through the process, and then afterwards you can make a complaint. And many people do. And if you have grounds for complaint, do it. Okay. The point is, though, again, these videos really do show if you conduct yourself properly, things usually play out pretty well. It's the people who don't conduct themselves properly in most cases. There are always exceptions. In most cases, that's why it spirals out of control. And you don't believe me? Watch enough of these videos and you'll see.
Yeah, and I almost feel like, and I don't know, I'll preface with this, but it almost seems like in some ways it's a self-perpetuating problem, right? These groups are told from a young age, don't trust the police are X, Y, and Z. So then when they've done something wrong and become in contact with the police, there's this automatic bias on their behalf about how the police are going to treat them.
Right. And look, we are pattern recognition machines. All humans, all creatures are. I mean, that's how we function. We recognize patterns. So if somebody, and I'm going to give, let's say benefit of the doubt to let's say one of the alleged criminals. I'm not saying in this case, I mean, her behavior was just this inexcusable. Okay. But if, let's say you've done nothing wrong and cops come and you've been told your entire life, not only are cops going to mistreat you, but they could shoot and kill you, which we hear all the time. We hear let's say unethical lawyers coming on and saying this. This has happened in every major city in Canada, in the States, where something happens and without all the details, people promulgate just misinformation. People hear that. They don't hear the corrections. They only hear this false narrative being portrayed. And again, does it happen in some cases? Yes, it does. Should those police be held accountable? Yes, they should. Are they always? Not at all. I mean, sorry, not always. Sometimes they are. Okay, right? We're having a certain case in Toronto right now with the police officer shot a teen who was in a mental health crisis on a streetcar many years ago. His family doesn't feel they're getting justice. The point is, if we take a black and white approach, right? Like either all cops are great and anyone who gets hurt, they had it coming, they did something wrong, or all cops are bastards and everyone's whichever one, it's not helpful, obviously, right? If you're raised to believe again that you could be shot just if a cop stops you, right? And you're acting suspicious, even if you're innocent, a police officer picks up that suspicious behavior, they are going to act a certain way. And then that's, as you say, that's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And so it's not the fault of the officer. It's not the fault of the person if they haven't done anything wrong, if they're only being a little bit tense and suspicious, if they haven't actually acted rudely like this young woman did. But if they're actually, if they innocently, just reflexively or whatever, this is a vicious cycle. And I blame the people who are promulgating these false narratives. They are to be held responsible, or they should be held responsible. They're not.
Yeah. And like you said, there's more to this video, and obviously there's pieces that we don't know because, it's only a video and one slice of this individual's life. But I think we can make an educated inference here about the parenting that this child has received, where probably was not told no very often. World probably revolves around her, no accountability. So there's lots of things, beyond what we're seeing in the video itself that likely has perpetuated and allowed this type of behavior. And it's tricky too, because I feel that many would call us, parent blamers or shamers or whatever the case may be. But the fact is, what is this kid, like 13, 14 years old?
Right.
At that age, you're a product of the upbringing that you've had. Yes, there's influence from social media, from friends, and so on and so forth. But that type of behavior doesn't come out of nowhere.
Right. And just seeing how the mother reacted. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, these videos, and whether, you read the comments or whether you look at the, let's say if they're posted on, let's say X or somewhere, it's like a Rorschach ink blot test. It's amazing. We can all be watching the exact same video, and the interpretations can be so diverse, because some people would say that mother's only fighting for her daughter. Look how she was manhandled. Wouldn't you do that same thing too? Well, yes, I would fight for my daughter, but I would wait to get the facts. And my daughters have gotten in trouble. Sometimes they've been the victim, whatever. And I get all the facts. So when I do speak with the principals or whoever else is involved, they know. Okay, I say, I'm not rushing to my daughter's defense. I've heard all the evidence, and if you have anything to contradict that, I'll change my tune. But knowing what I know, here's what's going to happen, right? And I do it respectfully, civilly, whatever, and I hold whoever is accountable to account. Okay, it's not my daughters get a free pass, and that was not the case here. Now, here's the problem. Back to the whole what we've been talking about, which is people, instead of looking at the fact that this mother, and again, we don't know all the details, so we're just going from what we're seeing. So she seems to be justifying her daughter's behavior. She seems to be, attacking anybody but her daughter's own conduct, right? The alcohol, and they said she brought alcohol to school, right? Well, where did she get the alcohol? Okay, well, that's a good question. Where do you think, right? And I don't know if she's gonna, because I know at the end of the video, which we don't see, but the mother calls the school, and even after after things have settled down, she's still attacking them and saying, "I'm going to hold you, I'm going to sue you, whatever," right? Or she calls it police. Or the school, I think it's both. I forget, but anyway, the point is, so what some people will do is they'll look at that. And they will see, I believe that, let's say the mother may not be white. Okay. So they're going to say she's from some intersectional, minority, some group or whatever. So, and instead of looking at the mother's conduct, they're going to say blah, blah, blah. And they're going to look at all the societal ills that have been perpetrated against her. Okay. Which may not even be true. They're just making these assumptions because of group identity. So instead of looking at the specific behavior of the girl, of the mother, okay, or of the police officer, whatever, they're looking at the culture, and they're going to look for excuses to justify this. And this is what we're talking about, that this type of behavior, and we're going to see it in a few seconds later as well, when you're told from a young age, none of this is your fault. It's white supremacy, it's colonialism, it's whatever, okay, that is going to foster in anybody. It's not about the color of their skin. It's not about the genetics. It's about being told, if you're told from a young age a certain narrative, that becomes your reality. So again, society is creating these little entitled monsters who believe not only are they allowed to get away with it, but they should conduct themselves this way because they are sticking it to the man, or they're fighting against white supremacy and so on.
And as we always talk about, it's such an example of good intentions executed poorly because, like we've spoken about in other episodes about DEI initiatives, I think that they are good insofar as identifying sociological phenomena that could be contributing to the way that things have historically been or people have been treated and so on and so forth. But that's been mangled into an excuse for poor behavior.
Exactly. And by the way, and then when people bring up stats to show, when people say, well, because of racism, because of this, and once again, I hate to have to always have these caveats, but not everyone's watched all of our videos, and people like to get triggered. They look to be, they're looking for outrage. None of this to deny that there are certain historical and even present, socio-cultural factors that affect some people more than others. Yes, that is true. But to use it as an excuse, okay, that's the problem. To use it to help explain it, that just explains it. The person still must be held accountable, and we have to take steps to remedy these behaviors, these mindsets, and so on. And instead, we're just ramping it up and saying, no. Every evidence that you give to prove something, or we can't prove, but to support a fact. Like, for example, that there are certain, we won't get into it because it's different podcasts, but basically that there are certain, let's say that certain people in certain groups were in fact able to conduct themselves pretty well. They were able to rise. They were able to do A, B, C, and D, let's say 50 years ago. And then something happened socially, and, and through the government and everything like that. And that changed and everything. So they were, 200 years ago, certain groups were doing really, really bad. Then they actually improved their lot. And now it's gotten worse again. Okay. Well, how do we, over time, the society is improving, we're putting things in place to help bring equity and so on. We're trying to help people out, and it's getting better and better and better. Yet people's conditions are getting worse and worse and worse. That doesn't make sense. And again, for a while, it was getting better, and then it went down again because certain societal policies, certain government programs. But when you put those numbers out, when you actually show the evidence and say it's not simply white supremacy, there are other explanations. Unfortunately, people don't have the mental and emotional capacity to step back and say, oh, I know I want to believe this. I know that's what it feels like, but the evidence suggests something else. Maybe I need to revise something. And by the way, in revising my position doesn't mean that certain factors aren't still there. It just means that they may not be the only explanation, or maybe they're only a tiny explanation. And there's other factors that we should look at, things that can be perhaps changed, as opposed to pursuing these crazy policies and these belief systems that are only proving to harm society.
Absolutely. Yeah. So should we watch the next one?
Sure. I'll get off my soapbox. Oh, one more thing. Sorry, Malini.
Yeah.
One other thing that because somebody might say, you know what, the girl, she had been drinking. So we might say some of her conduct might be because of the drinking. And in a lot of these videos, and when you watch police arrive, and especially when it's females, when you see them acting a certain way, let's not negate the role of alcohol. So alcohol is partly there. Okay. But the fact is the mother, she was sober. And when she called the school and everything else, like complaining, she was sober. Okay?
Well, and yeah, I can certainly acknowledge that alcohol is playing a role, but let's take that, a step back and say, well, where did she get the alcohol? That in and of itself is a huge part of the problem.
Right. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Let's check out the next one.
No. You're insulting me. What are you doing? No, I'm not going to. Why?
Put your hands behind your back.
No.
You're under arrest.
No.
You're going to be placed
I'm not under arrest.
You
I'm
are.
under cardiac arrest, if anything.
You're
No.
placed under arrest for trespassing and resisting.
You can't do that.
We can.
No, you're not going to. You're not going to. Stop. Stop.
I wish we didn't have to.
Stop.
I wish we didn't have
Stop.
to. We tried to work it out with you.
Stop.
And for whatever reason, you decided
Stop.
not to.
Stop policing me.
I'm sorry that this is the way that it had to go.
This is not the law. This isn't lawful. Alright. I'm not resisting. No, stop searching me. Stop touching me. I have to search you. You're molesting me. You're sexually assaulting me.
Stop.
You are sexually assaulting me. No.
She's not.
Yes, she
No, she's
is.
not.
Dad, help me. Please help me. Please help me.
Stop.
Get off me.
Stop.
Get off me.
Stop. Resisting. Now you're getting a felony.
Get off me. Stop touching me.
Stop resisting.
Stop touching me.
Stop resisting.
Stop touching me. He's mentally ill. Stop touching me. Oh, my arm.
Sit in the
Stop
car.
it.
Sit in the car.
Stop it. Can you please pick up your knife and sit in the car? I don't want to have to help you.
I got it. Sorry.
Get off me. Stop touching me.
Close the door.
I can't.
I'm sorry. She may be under the influence. I'm so sorry.
I can't.
Pick you two?
Yes.
All right. So you're out to charge of resisting. Okay. Listen, if you try to hurt us again, you're going to either end up getting tased.
Me hurt you? You guys were hurting me.
Okay. Well, you
guys
kicked both
actually
of them.
assaulted me.
You kicked both of them.
You grabbed me and then she touched my breast for
here's
no
the-
reason.
what?
So I don't really
I want you
know.
to
So
take a
you
deep
touched
breath.
me inappropriately as well on my skin.
Take
You know
a
that you
deep
don't need
breath.
to contact me like that. I was in
Take a
handcuffs
deep
already.
breath and listen to what I'm telling
My
you.
hands were behind my back. So
Your
no,
hands-
you shouldn't have searched me like that. And I should have
didn't
gotten
search
searched privately, first of all.
I
You
didn't
should
search
have
Listen
not
to what
been
I'm
out
telling
here,
you,
not
okay?
with her and doing it.
Here's the
Second.
thing.
And you're embarrassing me
We're
in
gonna
public.
open the door.
You're actually kind of, it's libel. It's a lot of libel.
Listen, you're embarrassing yourself. We're going to open the door. Okay. You're going to get put back in handcuffs. If you fight us,
Do you have a liability policy? Like, do you guys have some sort of commercial health
do
insurance?
not fight us, okay?
Yeah. So for context here, what took place initially, this was a multiple part video. The father actually called the police because he wanted her to get out of the car for trespassing. So I guess, to touch on what I mentioned earlier about parents saying no, the caption there said, the daughter was finally told no and she lost it. So, okay, maybe, but the way in which she was speaking, I don't even know what word to use because I don't want to use the wrong word here, but the calmness of her initial way of speaking was concerning to me because it almost sounded like she was trying to set up these police officers for something. And frankly, I was disgusted when I heard her say, "You're sexually assaulting me." To use that term in response to these people, again, doing their job because she was resisting is just absolutely unacceptable. And it's one of these things where I don't understand where this whole lack of any respect whatsoever for authority has arisen from. And Oren, I know you and I have talked before about, the difference between you as a teen and me as a teen. I was a, highly law abiding citizen who was afraid of all authority and followed all the rules, and you weren't. But regardless, that wasn't very common. I think that for the most part, and even in your circumstance, I think that there was a limit and there was a line where you're like, okay, fine, I'm going to listen to authority and abide. But I feel like more and more, there's just this absolute utter disrespect and disregard for the authority of police officers. And it's so concerning.
It is. Let's add one more word: disdain. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe they can get away with it. Now, I'm telling people, I posted this on Facebook months ago. If you watch enough of these videos, you will say police need to be paid much more.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I said this in a previous episode where I said, if you look at the abuse that these police officers have to put up with, because people are, allowed to, say it's their constitutional right. They can say what they want, within limits, and they can say horrific things about the police. They can insult them. They can be rude. And if they do this in any other job, what would you do? You would call the police and have them escorted out.
Yeah.
The police don't have that ability. And so people say, well, it's only because of the body cams. If the body cams weren't there, they'd crack them upside the skull. And that may be true. Which, by the way, I'm glad there's body cam for both, for the public's protection and for the police to show that so many of the things that we hear. And once again, I'm going back to this, that when young people, all they're hearing from social media, from their teachers, from the news, is that these police officers did something horrible without knowing the facts, then they believe that I'm going to have the same thing happen to me, and B, I'm allowed to fight back because these cops are terrible people, etc. They're not even people. They're just pigs. They're this or that. And again, you're right. I didn't have respect for authority when I was younger, but I did have a fear of consequence. And
Right.
so I knew when to knock it off. And in so many of these videos, when you talk about the calmness, and again, if you watch enough of these videos, which I have, and this is going to be a little bit of a tangent, but we always try to connect this to broader topics. So the fact is, you will watch these, and whether the woman is, and I don't mean to be picking on women, okay, men have a whole other, way of conducting themselves, but this is so common when, that there's a pattern. So whether they're sober or drunk, you see them acting a certain way. Often, they're being polite, she's saying please, whatever, even if they're insulting, but they're being polite, they're being calm. Sometimes they're being flirtatious, they're trying to be funny, okay? This happens all the time. And these videos, you say, well, they're only a tiny slice or whatever. Well, it's not just in these videos. When there's a domestic violence call, when there's theft, when there's other calls, I myself directly have seen this in the work that I've done when I've had to do these assessments, where this is how the person conducts themselves. And the fact is that, as you're saying that with this woman, she's basically trying to use Jedi mind tricks. You're under arrest. No, I'm not. Okay. These are not the droids you're looking for. Okay. She didn't make a joke. I'm cardiac arrest. I'll give her that one. That was pretty funny. Okay. But, and again, no, I'm not. No, I'm not trying to dictate the narrative. Mm-hmm. And so extrapolate from this situation to another one where the person claims something happened. And there are so many of these videos where they claim the police officer did A, B, C, or D. And some of these women, they're not just young women. Sometimes they're professionals. Sometimes they're politicians. Sometimes they're other police officers. But we have seen so many cases where even when they know that they're being recorded, they make these false allegations. And unfortunately, they, either it's a recording they didn't know about, or the recording they were aware disproves their narrative. But they say it with such conviction, and they say it with with such authority almost, that people tend to believe what they say. And if there wasn't this recording, we would believe, oh my gosh, this thing happened. And again, I'm not just talking about police arresting somebody, even in case of domestic violence. And again, I know it's a whole other topic, and this is not, crap all over Women Day today. I'm just saying, in this case, these videos are revealing certain realities that we want to extrapolate beyond the simple context that we're watching. Let's understand this happens in other situations as well. So we go from the calm, the flirtatious, the funny, the whatever else, and then it gets to violence. Then it gets to anger, and then it goes back again to calm, and then it goes to pleading. Then it goes to being the victim. Again, I've watched enough these videos. It's a very consistent pattern, and it's disturbing with how quickly the person can change. And again, just think about that. If they can do it in this context, they can do it in others.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's the concern. Exactly. And I was going to make that exact same point that, yes, this is only one slice of their life that we're seeing, but chances are if they can behave this way in that context, you better believe that there's other, if not many other contexts that they have that same pattern of behavior. And that victim mentality, I think, is certainly something we've spoken about before in other contexts, but that seems to be arising in at least the two that we've watched so far, where it's like, well, no, I'm the victim. I didn't do anything wrong, even though with the small snippet of what we're seeing, it's very clear that they did something. The police aren't going after them because they did nothing. Like, let's be realistic here.
Right. And one thing that you can see it all the time, and if you don't believe me, type in, for example, sovereign citizen police stop or traffic stop. Okay. So many times the police officer says, if you don't get out of the car, that's the number one thing you see, get out of the car. Now, there are certain situations and contexts where you don't have to. But in the case that we're seeing, if you're being lawfully stopped, this is now a lawful order. Get out of the car. Sometimes people say, well, they're asking, what are my rights? But fine. But when you're doing this for 30 minutes, when the police officers have other things that they need to get to, when you're demanding to see a supervisor, And you expect, again, this is narcissism, whether it's diagnosable or narcissism, to expect this police force should send somebody at 3 a.m. I want this police chief or the superintendent or whatever to come down and whatever. Okay. The police officer's warned, we are doing our legal duty, our lawfully, constituted duty. And if you don't get out of the car, as we are asking you to do, if you don't comply, we are going to break this window and make you come out. And they're warned over and over and over. And then it happens. And then you see the person later on in the video saying that for some reason, they just broke the window. They didn't. Okay. Again, it's this twisting of narratives, always self-serving. That's what people do. Okay. But in such a way that it distorts reality. It's gaslighting. And once again, I'm not going to diagnose all these people, but the fact is, whether we are raising, whether there's full-blown narcissists or narcissistic traits, we are raising children and teens and young people to become narcissistic, to believe that they are entitled to act certain ways, that there's no consequence to their action, and that if something goes wrong, that they will have recourse. Not, that they'll say, I'm going to find somebody to blame. Okay. This is, again, these are some of the main traits of a narcissist, and we are encouraging this.
Yeah. And without rehashing everything we've spoken about in our parenting episodes, I really want to encourage people to go back and watch those because, without jumping too far ahead, what can you do? Well, you can, from a young age, instill proper parenting strategies that are going to ensure that your child knows that the world doesn't revolve around them.
And that there's accountability.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Okay.
So there's a third one with these kids at the mall. Let's watch that, and then we can kind of tie it all together.
Okay.
What's your last name?
Yes.
All right, so do me a favor. Get mom or dad on the phone so I can talk to them, and you too, please, both of y'all.
I'm at the hospital.
Okay, I need somebody. So this is gonna be one of two. This is gonna happen one of two ways.
Sir,
This is gonna. Have you asked them to leave?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, so this is gonna happen.
Wait,
Stop.
He never asked me to leave.
Sit down. You're not going anywhere. Sit down. So this is gonna go one of two ways.
Okay, I'm about to leave.
You're not gonna leave. You're gonna sit down.
He just said to leave.
I cannot let you leave. You're a child, so now I gotta contact the parent.
Wait, what?
Sit down. Hey,
Don't
sit down.
touch me. You're
gonna go to jail.
Don't touch me.
You're
Don't
gonna go
touch
to
me.
jail.
Don't touch
you
me.
to sit down.
Don't touch me.
So-
I was finna sit down. Don't touch me.
Okay.
I don't like being touched. Don't touch me.
This is gonna happen one of two ways. You're either gonna get a parent on the phone so I go talk to him, or you go to jail. Is that
We're
simple?
going to jail for what? What did
For
we
trespass
do?
after warning, they asked you to leave, and you're
He
still
didn't
here.
ask on God. He didn't ask me to leave. He never asked
So
us
we'll
to
make this
leave.
simple. Call a parent and let me talk to a parent. It's that simple.
That's what I'm trying to tell y'all. Like,
So call a parent. You have a cell phone. Call a
so
parent.
what did you tell them?
What does it matter? Call a parent. I don't understand what the problem is. Just call a
The
parent.
problem is it's your approach.
The problem
You
is,
can do whatever you want.
right, the
Yeah,
problem
that's
is you don't listen. That's the
You've never been
problem.
told no.
I have been told
Now
no.
you're being told no.
I have been told no. Who is you supposed to be?
Multiple times.
Tell me to tell.
We're the police. That's who we are.
Oh, well, obviously I ain't that slow. I know who y'all is, but like, who is
Hey,
he supposed to be?
get off
My
of TikTok
mom?
and call a parent.
Police.
You heard what I
let's take him
said,
to jail.
right?
Let's just arrest him.
No, she just said, "Where do you guys stay?"
Go ahead. No, we're not telling you all that. Well, go ahead, talk.
You are gonna tell me how, because I'll just take you to jail. It's that
You
simple.
can't take me to jail for
Yes,
not
I
saying
can.
where I stay. If my mama finna come pick me up.
Hear me out. Okay?
Go ahead.
You have to comply with what this officer's telling you, because if not, he's gonna take you to jail. He already has enough, right?
Okay,
Even listen.
if
Hear
he
me out,
call-
though. Hear
if
me
he
out for a
call
second.
my mom-
I haven't talked.
If he called,
It doesn't matter.
Okay,
It doesn't
I
matter.
understand that,
He
but
could
if he
arrest
called
you
my mom-
anyways. Even
Okay,
calling
oh
your mom,
well
he can
then.
arrest you
Oh well,
anyways.
oh well.
Oh well, what? That
Oh, well,
doesn't
I
make no
didn't touch nobody. What
sense.
y'all gonna touch me with?
That don't make no sense.
Okay, and oldest daughter name.
And you know what she told
This
me?
one.
You know what she told me? I don't have to tell you anything. I'm not telling you my name.
So what happened? Nicole, shut up.
It's on body camera.
Can you be quiet? Shut the fuck. If I hit her, y'all gonna send me to jail.
That's your daughter. You don't
First of
know.
all, shut the fuck up. Shut up. Shut the fuck. You was at. Shut up. Shut the fuck. You was at Palm Beach Gardens. You don't play with this police department. Y'all wanna be grown so fucking bad, don't know shit. Shut.
All right. So yeah, much like the other two that we watched, the lack of accountability, mother, automatically jumping to the defense of her daughter before knowing the whole story. Again, I think it comes down to these kids not having respect for authority, not actually believing that there's going to be real consequences for their action, I think is a really big piece of this as well.
Well, to the mother's credit, afterwards, when she realized what was going on, she really did lay into the kids, and she was telling them, and, it's about you better respect and this and that. And she's in security as well, so she understood. So I think in the end, the mother did the right thing. I'm not going to say anything about her parenting beyond that. Okay. But the fact is, yes, everything that you said, the kids are, evincing these types of belief systems and behaviors. And we've talked about this before, but I don't think it can be stressed enough, which is parents have to understand that kids are seeing so many of these videos on TikTok, especially, of their supposed peers acting like pieces of crap, acting so disrespectfully and so on. And this is becoming the norm. Okay.
Bad enough and it's funny and it's revered.
It's revered. Exactly. Yeah. Okay. It's not just being modeled, it's being modeled in the most, like the most amazing way, that this is what, this will get you something. Right. And again, people, we're social animals. We imitate what we see. And if we see something and it has bad consequences, then people are going to go, whoa, okay, I don't want that to happen to me. Mm-hmm. But if there's no real bad consequence, if the consequences are actually supposedly positive, then people are going to be enticed to want to do it themselves when this is all they see from a young age. Parents, please stop abdicating your responsibility. Know what's out there. Have the talk with your kids. And I've had so many parents say, well, what can I do? They're going to see these videos. And we've talked about this before, but it's worth saying again. Yes, they are going to see them, but you can play the role of filter. Help them create their own filter and realize, yes, this is going on. It's wrong. And, it's disrespectful. It's this and that. And at the very least, if you act this way, there's a really good chance that some negative consequence is going to come to you. Okay. At the very least, that can resonate. Now, most teens will say, yeah. They won't believe it, but at least you can say you've tried your damnedest. And I hope on a deeper level, just some, civility, morality, being pro-social. And once again, the problem is that teachers, far too many teachers, and these, social media influencers, quote unquote influencers, okay, and parents themselves, as well as peers and so on, and politicians, so many of these people are portraying the authority figures, police especially, teachers and so on, in the most negative light. Mm-hmm. So why would kids have any respect or fear of them? Why would they think they need to abide by what they're saying when they are just tools of, white supremacy? And I know I keep going back to that, but the fact is that's what kids are hearing.
Yeah. So. And to that point, as our listeners know, I work with a lot of police officers and who've been in the profession for 20, 30 years and have witnessed that change and that evolution of the attitude that society has towards them and how detrimental that is to them asserting their authority. So, it's not just videos on the internet. This is, firsthand knowledge that I have in working with these individuals who are quite dismayed by the fact that they are not being permitted to do their job, quite frankly. So, we've been talking a lot about parents and the role of parenting in this, but I want to talk a little bit about what people can do if they're adults and they're recognizing like, hey, maybe this is the attitude that I have. Maybe I am a little bit entitled and what can I do? So I would say that easier said than done, first and foremost. And if it is somebody who actually does meet diagnostic criteria for a personality disorder, even more difficult to be able to take that step back and recognize one's own behavior and what needs to change. But generally speaking, I would say that one of the biggest things that's missing with these individuals is the ability to really stop and reflect and have empathy for others around. So if we go back to Sushi Lady that we talked about at the beginning of the episode here, I think that one of the biggest things that was lacking from her was some degree of empathy. So, fine. Let's agree that maybe the sushi at the airport wasn't the best sushi she's ever had, but she didn't consider, and at least in the way she portrayed her case, did not consider the stance of the server, of the chef, of anybody else in the situation, not to mention the discomfort of all the other patrons in the restaurant listening to her making a scene. So I think that, if there's one thing that people who are recognizing that maybe they do present with a little bit of entitlement, the best thing that I would say to work on practicing is reflect on, can I be more empathetic?
100%. And so it's empathy for the others. And, empathy it's not a zero-sum game. If I think about the other person's perspective, this person is just a server. They're just doing their job, whatever else. Okay. They're not the ones who set the price. They didn't present the sushi, right? For example. So thinking all of that does not take away from your position. You can still advocate for yourself. You can still try to get some kind of recourse, whatever, but with, as you say, with a little bit of empathy, a bit of compassion, doing it the right way. And even pragmatically speaking, if you act like a jerk, most people are not going to feel, compelled to try to do right by you. So, at the very least, but yeah, the empathy is so important. And then the second part is, and my whole book, if I ever get it published, is about this, which is personal accountability. It's not blaming yourself unnecessarily or needlessly or harshly. It's saying, what is my role in all of this, either in making the problem or in trying to remedy it? How can I do it in the most practical, effective way? And again, if I've done something wrong, I've got to own it. And and unfortunately that's become a bad word today. In the old days, it's a sign of strength to be able to recognize your faults, to be able to apologize for it, and to try to make amends for it. At the very least, to apologize. Okay. So I'm telling people, I say this to all my patients all the time, right? I advocate for you and I'm trying to help you, but the best way I can help you is to help you take personal responsibility. And the thing is, I've mentioned this before, but rationalization is basically making bad excuses or cheap excuses for your actions or inactions. And it's so easy to do that. And I tell people, it's just a cheap defense mechanism. And try to set your bar higher. Try to say, yeah, I could do that. I could say, well, these damn airport fees and all these servers, and I've had bad service before. And okay, you can do that. It's easy, sure, and you can sleep at night maybe. But there's a part of you that probably deep down knows that. Wait a second, I'm part of this as well. What was my role in all this? And when you lie to yourself like that, you think you're sleeping better at night, but you're not. Eventually, it catches up to you. So, to having the insight to say, I'm not perfect. I've made my mistakes. I've done whatever. And, again, I have to take personal accountability. Before I can expect any accountability from someone else, I need to as well. Whether it's in this situation, maybe in this situation, I'm totally flawless. Fine. Okay. But at least conduct yourself properly. And, if you need to escalate, fine. Do it in a pragmatic and an effective manner. Okay. But don't start up here being a total a-hole. Okay. And just making life miserable for everyone around you.
Right. Yeah. So I feel like this is a theme that will weave its way through many of our future episodes. But listeners, we want to hear what you think about entitlement. Is it something that you've been witnessing a lot more lately? What are your thoughts on the videos that we watched? Leave your comments and we'd love to know what you think.
And on that note, until next time, keep your eyes on the road and your hands upon the wheel.